So she's kind of like a nice version of Coach Greg, okay? A nicer version, much nicer, the opposite of me in a way. Okay, so we have very popular registered dietitian Abbey Sharp with me today. You may have seen her on my channel before. We've done numerous videos about each other. You're probably thinking, Abbey Sharp is being interviewed? And yeah, absolutely. She actually knows what she's talking about. I've watched more and more of her videos lately, and she actually speaks a lot like me. So she's kind of like a nice version of Coach Greg. Okay, a nicer version, much nicer, the opposite of me in a way. We see eye to eye on a lot of things, and some we don't, but we're going to talk about these things today. So, hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Greg.
So can you believe you're on this channel? Did you ever think I would like literally ask you after all we've gone through?
No, absolutely not. I was like totally shocked when I got that DM, but at the same time, it was actually something that we were discussing with our team on our end as well. So it, I guess we willed it in the universe, but yeah, I think that this is the collaboration that nobody knew that they needed, but they definitely need.
Yeah, and if you actually look at our content, you literally will watch people's videos and see what they eat and do a video about it. And I literally have done the same thing. So we almost have the same type of a channel in some ends. I obviously do a lot of different things as well, but a lot of times you're looking over a diet and then you give your opinion. And you once did that with me, and I was not impressed. I made a trilogy. You guys remember that? I made a trilogy. Literally, it could have been a Netflix documentary. I was like, I can't believe she said this about me. And we went back and forth, but now it's all been passed. It's been over a year, and we seem to think the same way. So we're going to discuss some really interesting topics today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's just jump right into this. Let's start with, so the first question I want to know. Of all the people you've done video reviews on, like diet reviews, who would you say is the worst eater, like the worst, and why? And I'm thinking, come to mind, Nikocado Avocado, Amberlyn Reed, or even Stephanie Buttermore, doing those eating challenges, for example. Does anyone stand out to you?
There are so many. It's like different shades of bad. And to me, it's not always that like their diet specifically is bad, but it's often just like the information and some of the messaging around the diet that's like really problematic. But I mean, yeah, like the Nikocado avocados and like the Trisha Paytases of the world, when they're getting into those like binges and mukbangs and that kind of thing, that I think is a problem. That is obviously unhealthy in my eyes as a registered dietitian. But I also think that there are larger issues going on that, maybe should not be publicly shared on a platform like YouTube. And then you get the like raw frugivores, like the raw vegan frugivores who are spewing so much misinformation about nutrition. And yeah, I just think that like eating a meal of 6 mangoes and a case of dates, not balanced. It's not going to be good. And obviously there will always be metabolic outliers who can thrive on diets like this. But I think for the most part, most people need a good balance of macros in their day. So those are like the bad, in my opinion, some of the worst ones I've seen from like a nutrition point of view. But then there's also like influencers like Olivia D'Andrea, who, I have a lot of empathy for, but I also worry about the young audience that they're speaking to with just so much overly restrictive kind of recommendations and practices. So I think that's also a big problem as well.
And speaking of these different dieters, so I basically see two main problems here. You have the ones like the Nicocados that are like just eating like the mukbang videos or like going in with 10,000 calorie diets and whatnot. Then we have the opposite extreme where people are like 80 pounds, 90 pounds. They're, very, very restrictive eating. And you can just tell by looking at them, they're underweight. Like, do you think one is worse than the other? Because I'll tell you my opinion, it's equally bad. Equally bad. To be extremely overweight, extremely underweight, we should all be at a healthy weight. So to me, anything that promotes one or the other, that's not good.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we can say that one is worse than the other. I think that when we're talking about these behaviors of like, let's just like put aside the actual physical aesthetic body weight. I try on my channel not to actually say like, oh, this person is like visibly so underweight, she's anorexic or whatever, because ultimately, like, I'm not her dietitian. I don't have her lab work. I don't have her chart in front of me. But when I just looking at the eating behaviors alone, yes, I think there's something to be said for both sides being problematic and doing mukbangs and obvious binges and eating challenges. I don't think that that's healthy. And I also don't think that promoting eating, 800 calories a day or subsisting on massive like salads and no protein and no fats, etc., is also unhealthy.
Different question. Do you think that you can out exercise a bad diet? And by this, I mean, if you do enough exercise, does that offset eating mostly crap and junk? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, I'm a dietitian, so I went into this field for a reason. But I think when we're talking about weight specifically, it's possible to out exercise a bad diet if you're like Michael Phelps, I suppose, and you're exercising to that extent, but that is highly unlikely. But from a health perspective, I say hard stop, no. We need fiber for moving our, for regularity. We need micronutrients for supporting energy. We need protein for muscle protein synthesis. So if we are eating only Twinkies all day, every day, we're probably not going to feel very good. And so, yeah, I would say that overall, you can't out exercise a bad diet.
And for example, I've had debates with like Dave Palumbo, and I'm like, if you are eating in a calorie deficit, I don't care what it's from, you will lose weight. And they're like, no, it's all about the macros. You need this percent of this and that. And I'm like, look, if you eat just licorice, if I eat 2,000 calories a day of licorice, I'm going to be shredded. I'm not going to have a lot of muscle because I don't have the muscle, the protein to build a muscle, but I'll be shredded. But certainly my health will not be there. If I'm Michael Phelps and I'm training 5 hours a day in the pool swimming, I'm going to burn off all those calories. But if I'm not eating fiber, the micronutrients, all the things that I need to keep my body healthy, I can't call myself healthy. Just because I'm skinny doesn't mean I'm healthy.
Correct. I completely agree with that. And that's another reason why we can't just like look at somebody on Instagram and say, oh, they must be really healthy. There are so many factors going on. And like you said, you could theoretically just be subsisting on, nutrient poor foods and therefore actually not meeting your micronutrient needs or fiber needs. Maybe your gut microbiome is completely a mess. Your hormones might be totally a wreck. Maybe you're not sleeping, maybe you're stressed, and all of this is interplay. So I don't think that it's as simple as just like, oh, as long as you fit it into your macros or your calories, then obviously you're going to be healthy. It's not the case.
Okay. How important is breakfast? Do we even need it? Is it beneficial? Like, a lot of people are just skipping breakfast. Like, is it something you need? Because for me, most important meal of the day. Some people it's like, no, why would you need breakfast? So does it matter if we skip breakfast, if we skip meals? Can you eat once a day? OMAD diet, intermittent fasting? Does any of that really matter when it comes down to it from a dietitian's perspective?
I love breakfast like you. I live for breakfast. I'm an early riser and I get up at 5 and I wake up hungry and I need to eat. So to me, it is important. But I also acknowledge that not everyone's circadian rhythms feel this way. And there are a lot of people who can function quite easily without having quote unquote breakfast. But generally speaking, I would say for the average person, it matters less about having, specific meals at specific times than it does for just making sure that you're getting all of your micronutrients, macronutrients, and calories in the day in some way. Now, when we're talking about extreme cases like OMAD, like, one meal a day or whatever, I think that it's very difficult for most people to meet their nutrient needs in the course of just one meal. I can't imagine trying to eat like 2,500 calories in a meal. I would feel horrible, especially if I was trying to do that in a way that's also going to give me the fiber that I need. Having like 50 grams of or like 35 grams of fiber in one sitting, probably not going to feel so good for a lot of people. But I will say that in the research, there are actually some metabolic benefits to eating breakfast, in the sense that what we see is that some research on intermittent fasting has shown that folks that front load their calories earlier on in the day have better insulin sensitivity than people who like have the majority of their calories later on in the day. And I find, and you probably do too, that most people who do kind of intermittent fasting style regimens, they tend to skip breakfast, maybe have their first meal noon, 1 o'clock, somewhere in that neighborhood, when actually, based on their circadian rhythm, we actually know that there's benefits to shifting that whole day up to the earlier morning hours. So, I mean, I think that for most people, breakfast is important. And then obviously in the fitness community, we know if you're specifically looking to kind of build muscle and protein muscle synthesis, then having more, there's metabolic and muscle synthesis benefits to having kind of smaller, more regular meals throughout the day.
Absolutely. I mean, you need to eat your first meal a day. That's the first chance to build muscle. You need those proteins. So if you're skipping it, I'm like, you're just skipping a chance to build muscle here. And you mentioned that you wake up at 5 and you're hungry right away. And I have this theory, and let me know what you think of this. If you wake up hungry, it probably means that you're not eating above your biologically determined kind of set point for your weight. And if you wake up hungry, it means that you're probably at a good zone. And likely people who are not hungry in the morning, they tend to eat too many of their calories before bed. It's like you wake up and you're like, well, I don't eat breakfast because I'm not hungry. And it's like, what did you eat before bed? Well, 2,000 calorie pizza. And it's like, that's not even digested yet. So you're waking up and you're like, oh, I'm going to go do my empty stomach cardio. Meanwhile, you have a 2,000 calorie pizza that's not even digested yet. So you think you're doing empty stomach cardio, your stomach's not empty, and you're only hungry because you're eating too much later in the day. Like, what do you think of that theory?
I totally agree, and I mean, I can't say that's the case for everybody, but one thing that a lot of people tell me, I'm not hungry for breakfast in the morning, and even like my husband says the same thing. I'm not a breakfast person. I don't want to eat breakfast because I'm not hungry in the morning. Well, that's because they have a habit of in the later hours of the day, they're not eating in the morning. Maybe they're like kind of pacifying their hunger with coffee or other kind of beverages.
Then I do that,
kind of get ravenous.
But I'm still eating breakfast.
Yeah, then they get ravenous. And they basically consume the bulk of all their calories right before bed. So of course they're going to wake up not being very hungry. And it does take time to basically retrain your appetite to kind of shift those calories earlier on in the day, so that they're just more evenly spaced throughout the day. And that's going to help probably with digestion, especially for folks who are having trouble kind of staying asleep and getting a really good night's rest. But it's also important for, like we said, like muscle protein synthesis, and that you're missing out on those opportunities in the earlier hours of the day to actually start building that muscle. So if you want to be a breakfast person, you kind of have to make the first step, and that means eating when you're not particularly that hungry, at least to start. And that will change over time as you start to shift all those calories early on in the day.
And I don't know about, I don't know your history, but have you ever been like really overweight or like, like eating too much? Like personally, I bulked up before thinking, well, I was trying to break a world record. So I'm like eating all the time. I never was hungry. I wake up never hungry, but it's because I was 232 pounds. Just for reference, I'm 40 pounds smaller than that now. So I was quite heavy. I was overweight. And so I was never hungry. So my hunger hormones were kicking in. There was no, ghrelin wasn't punching. I always say ghrelin's punching in the face, making you want to eat. It wasn't there. I was eating too much. So my feeling is people that are just never hungry, they're probably eating too many calories overall.
I mean, in some cases that is the case. I mean, there's lots of reasons for blunted hunger cues. I mean, it actually can also be because of the opposite issue. I mean, we hear like in eating disorder recovery, for example, where clearly they are not consuming enough calories, but they still do not have hunger cues. And that over time, we dull those cues down. And it's very hard for people who have struggled with getting and eating enough to actually relearn to hear those hunger cues again. They've just been blunted. So it actually can go both ways. Yes, you may not be hungry because you're eating enough or you're eating too much. And of course, then your body's saying, okay, I'm good. your body's actually communicating the right message in that case. It's actually doing you a favor, saying, okay, you've had enough. You don't need to eat anymore. We're good. But then it can also happen in the opposite situation as well. And I see that all the time.
Great information, great perspective. Out of curiosity, how many calories do you eat a day, and what is your exercise routine? So, like, obviously you have a lot of knowledge, you've studied this. So, how has this been applied to your own body? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, so I don't count calories specifically. I really do try to just kind of like eat what I want and when I'm hungry. But obviously, I'm a dietitian, so I have developed and I have gathered enough data to have a good sense of what feels good to my body. And what feels good to my body is having balanced meals, and that includes fruits and vegetables and lean protein and some complex carbohydrates, etc. Not all the time. I'm not perfect. I have pizza, I have cake, I have all the things. But I do know what actually makes me feel the best. But if I were to estimate, because obviously as a dietitian, I have a good sense of calories, I would say probably around 22 to 2,500 calories a day, give or take. More on the weekends, not because it's a cheat day or anything like that, but simply because my whole family is kind of like outside of the normal school work routine, and we're going to brunch with friends, we're going to dinner with our family. And so obviously, as you know, restaurant food is obviously higher in calories and fat and sugar and all the things. So yeah, it's not something that I actually even think about though, because my weight is stable. So obviously I'm doing something that works, and I'm not ever eating past, like, well, I mean, occasionally I do, but I'm not consistently gorging myself to the point that I feel ill. But in terms of exercise,
Yes.
I love exercise. I'm one of those. I just love to move my body. I would say now I'm a mama too, so I'm not doing like anything extreme here, but I do some form of weight related training almost every single day. Maybe I take a rest day, of course, but something, and it's usually more gentle than like anything extreme. But I have a bar Pilates trainer I work with a couple times a week. I have another trainer that I work with who does more strength training. I do the Peloton app for their strength training classes, and then I walk a ton with my kids. So I walk them to school, I walk them back. I go on walks with my little baby. So I get a fair bit of activity in. And that for me is just like to balance me sitting here in my chair every single day. So it's just what feels good to my body.
Yeah, it does sound like you're highly active. You have weights and you have designated cardio. You do the Peloton. I race on Zwift, a similar kind of, I'm into the bike riding a lot. So, I mean, I heard 2,200 to 25. I was quite surprised that you could eat that much, but hearing how much exercise you're doing, it's obviously energy out versus energy in. The out, you got a lot more calories being burnt, so you can just eat more. That's great. Most people, they can get motivated for 4 weeks, for 4 months, or whatever that goal is, the wedding, the trip down south. But after that, they seem to gain it all back and then some. So what do you think? What should people do to kind of, I guess, promote them to actually lose the weight, but then to keep it off?
Yeah, weight maintenance is very hard. Like it's always easy to lose weight. There's a plethora of weight loss fads and diets and routines that you can take on for 2 weeks, and the weight might come off. Whether or not that's fat is another story. But I would say my take-home message for most people is to go slow, because what normally happens is that, we take on these extreme diets. We decide, okay, we're going to work out twice a day, every single day. We're going to, only eat vegetables every single day and cut out all the foods that we love. And what happens? We throw in the towel in a week or two, obviously, because that's just not sustainable. So my suggestion for people is do not take on anything unless you've already thought it through in your head that you can do that for the rest of your life. And what I mean by that is these small, little, simple changes to your lifestyle that do not make you miserable. So maybe that is adding a salad to one of your meals every single day. Is that doable for you? Great. If it's not, then we find something else. Maybe if you're used to drinking 3 Cokes a day, okay, how about we bring it down to 2 and see how that feels? Is that doable? No? Okay, we'll work on something else then. You have to find the areas of your life that you are willing to compromise on that is not going to make you miserable or is going to interfere with your enjoyment of life. Because we like pleasure. And if we start to cut into our pleasure, we're going to push back. We're going to rebel. And that's exactly what ends up happening with, like you said, most people who go on diets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has to be something you can do for the rest of your life. As soon as you think, I'm going to do this for a bit, it's not going to work. It's not worth it. I keep preaching to people, close your eyes, imagine your dream physique, and then I say, open them. You're not getting it. I'm like halfway there. So every time someone hires me, I see these goals and I'm like, why do you need to lose so much weight, especially so quickly? Everyone seems to think it's a race. The slower they lose the weight, the more likely they're going to keep it off, and the less miserable they're going to be. You start talking about 1,000 calorie daily deficit to lose 2 pounds of fat a week. It's a nightmare. Trust me, I've tried it. It is a nightmare. But it's hard to convince people that losing 0.5 pound a week is great because they want that before and after photo. In 3 months, they want the 6-pack. Even though they're morbidly obese now, they say, well, this person did it. And it's like, just because they did it doesn't mean you can, and doesn't mean you'll even be happy if you do that. For those of you who aren't familiar with your channel and its content, what would you want to tell my audience? Because not everyone knows who you are. So what would you want them to leave thinking about you, like they're interested in following you? What can they learn from you? Like, what kind of channel do you have?
So kind of like yours, I do a lot of reviews and responses to kind of popular diet culture content that we find elsewhere online through YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, etc. So I try to weave in little tidbits of nutrition knowledge and information and lessons in all of my videos. And so just like little factoids, basically. So I use other people's videos as like a jumping off point as commentary to teach people little nuggets about nutrition. And I try to do so in a comedic way. Obviously, my approach is very kind of anti-diet culture, anti-diet fads. So that's usually kind of the angle that I take when I am reviewing a lot of these other influencers and YouTubers.
And I would like to add that she doesn't just follow like somebody and then do a diet review. I've seen her do like on its own, stand-alone, here is how you could like diet. And so I really like those videos because you can tell you're highly educated on the subject and you're giving really good information. Those are my favorites, more so than watching somebody eat and commenting. Those are great, but I like just the standalone videos. So take a look, have a look on her channel, watch the ones that you want. I'm sure you'll see somebody famous that you know and you'll be like, well, how does that person actually eat and what is her opinion on it? So I highly recommend you go and check her out.